Welcome to our pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today
we are three best friends
because we are joined by Adrian M. Gibson to discuss Mushroom Blues, his new book that's coming out very soon when you're listening to this.
Debut novel.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. So can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your new book?
So I'm Adrian M. Gibson. You're in the SFF podcast space, so maybe you've heard of my podcast, SFF Addicts, which I host with my bestie, MJ Kuhn, who's also been on our pods, so you may have heard her in the past. So I'm an SFF author, an illustrator. I used to be a tattoo artist full-time, but now it's kind of like just do it when the occasion arises kind of thing. And I'm also a stay-at-home dad. Which affords me time to lose my mind and write at the same time. And Mushroom Blues is my debut novel. It's the first book in the Hoffman Report series, but also the first book in the Fungalverse shared universe, which is sort of an interconnected universe that I've created, which will span multiple series and multiple books. And the Hoffman Report is kind of the first introduction to that.
The start of it all.
That's amazing. Well, our listeners should have heard of you because I've often mentioned your podcast in certain episodes that I've listened to. And also when I told my husband that you were going to be coming on the podcast, he was like, oh my gosh, that's pretty real, isn't it? Because
does he hear my voice in like the kitchen?
Yes,
and stuff?
I'll be listening to SFF Addicts and he'll like hear you. And so when I said, oh yeah, I'm gonna have Adrian Gibson on tonight, and my husband was just like, oh, wow.
So, tell him hi from me.
I will. Things have gotten real. You're a celebrity within my household. But Adrian, before we get into your writing a little more, can you tell us a little bit about you as a reader and like some favorite books, childhood favorites maybe?
I have been deep in it since I was young. My grandma taught my brothers and I all how to read, and just through her, she's British, so I was introduced to kind of like Narnia and Tolkien, and through my older brothers I was introduced to things that I probably shouldn't have seen or read at that age. So it's like on one hand I'm reading like, you know, the Silver Chair, and then on the other hand I'm watching like X-Files, which is not a very healthy contrast for like a 7-year-old or anything like that. But I kind of devoured as much as I could in the SFF space. But that was everything from like Lemony Snicket and Captain Underpants to The Hobbit and Narnia and Eragon and stuff like that. So it was like a very wide spread of stuff that I was indulging in. But I loved anything that was comics. I loved anything that was fantasy. I loved anything that was sci-fi, even though I didn't really have a conception at that point of what genres were. And as I got older, you know, just like I didn't write fan fiction, but I drew fan fiction comics.
That's amazing.
And so it was kind of like my literature side and my illustration side co-developed over the course of my lifetime, which is borne fruit in my later years. Thankfully, it didn't all go to waste. So
that's so
awesome.
Cool.
We mentioned off the recording that you and I were both the oops babies that came at the end, and I feel like it is a very real life experience to watch things that you weren't supposed to because your parents are like, it's fine, they're with the other three, I don't care.
Man, it's crazy. Like I remember having nightmares for a week because my brother let me watch an episode of the X-Files. I explicitly remember I've never gone back and watched it because I don't want to relive it. But it was like these astronauts in space, and their space shuttle got haunted by like some weird ethereal space ghost thing.
Oh, that would have
freaked me the fuck out. And I had nightmares for like a week, and my mom and dad were so pissed. And it's just like
Everyone
it
was
put
involved at this point.
yeah, it was like a family affair. This was some wild stuff, but it was like a week of me having like screaming nightmares.
Oh yeah.
Which is
Oh,
good
no.
for my parents because they're deaf, so it's like
Oh,
that, you know.
they were like,
They didn't
fine, but
yeah, I woke them up, but not because of
Oh
screaming,
my
because of other
God.
things. So yeah.
yeah, I specifically remember growing up with like the TV show Dark Angel with Jessica Alba, and there were
Yeah.
episodes where she would get super horny, and my parents were like, "You have to dip out of those specific episodes, but everything
Right.
else fair game. Like all the violence, everything else great,
Wow.
but those ones you need to leave the room." So I remember
They
there
had
were
a
just
lot of
certain
trust in
episodes.
you to dip out.
I mean, they were
Yeah.
mostly watching it with me. That was the whole thing. Like you're very
Mhm.
like unsupervised, supervised, where they're like, "Hey, you need to leave the room for this episode. We're not going
But
to
that's
let
a
you watch
very
this."
North American attitude where it's like you can't watch the sex, but you
Right.
can stick around for the violence. That's fine.
Exactly.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
You can watch her
Somebody
draw
just lost
blood.
their leg terribly, and
Yeah.
that's fine.
Oh,
But
but
like,
penetration, get out of here. Get out of here.
premarital sex.
There might
Get
be a
out of
boob.
here.
Leave the room.
Get that nipple out of here.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to writing and reading, what has your writing journey been like? And with this debut novel, you are publishing it into the indie sphere. What made you decide to pursue indie publishing for this?
So this has been, both aspects of that have been quite a journey. The
Mhm.
writing side is mostly, I mentioned that I was doing like fan fiction comics and stuff,
Mhm.
but the actual act of like writing fiction was something that I like dabbled in again and again and again and again. And I studied English literature at university. I dabbled with it there. I moved to Berlin and I was there for 3 years, and it's like I dabbled in it there. And then I came to Ecuador, and that was when I was like tattooing full time, but also had a lot more free time,
Mhm.
because it's like I had my own studio and I would just spend a lot of my time drawing, but then I started spending more of my time writing as well. And actually the Fungalverse started out with illustrations before it started out with text. So it's kind of like this, nobody who's listening can see it, but this is one of the main characters in the Hoffman Report and in a future series. And he was like one of the first, characters that I came up with. And he was kind of like my opening up to conceptualizing like what is a fungal person, like how would mushrooms symbiotically meld with a species of humans. And so it's kind of like that idea flourished into me wanting to write. Actually, it started as like a sort of like travelogue type thing. Sort of, it was called like um the Outsider's Guide to the Mushroom Kingdom. And so it's like more fantasy, and it was kind of like my conceptualization of how mushrooms could be used as a fictional device to explore different facets of humanity and human nature, from architecture and society and hierarchical organization and the way systems interact with each other, down to stuff like biology and the ways in which people interact with one another. And so it was like this big exploration of this, but I got so fucking bogged down in world building that I was like drawing and coming up with all these ideas, but I didn't actually spend enough time writing the thing that most people like to read, which is like a story with characters doing interesting things. And so it took a while for that to develop, in terms of me realizing like the foundations of this world are actually really cool, but not many people are going to be interested in reading like a travelogue that would be exploring things in a potentially preachy way.
A historical
Because
text that you've
yeah,
got
yeah, it's
like super detailed, and somebody comes across,
yeah.
whoa.
I mean, it was kind of like imagine Don Quixote on mushrooms, where it's kind of
Okay.
like, or these like explorers who are going to different places. I think I can't remember the name of the author, but it's called Invisible Cities.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember the name of the author. Dang it. Okay. anyways, so the book is called Invisible Cities, but it's basically like
By Italio Calvino.
yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
It's exploring
I
different
was just gonna Google it.
exploring different cities and basically using that as a framework to discuss moral issues and human nature and different things like that, and the way that humans organize and the way that cities organize based around us, but the way that cities also organize and influence people. But I was not deft enough to accomplish something like that. And so I continued drawing and I continued coming up with ideas, and I changed the sort of foundations in terms of, I kept mushrooms and mycelium and all that stuff, which I absolutely adore, but I blended it with genres that I also adore. So it's like mystery coming into play, police procedurals, cyberpunk, and all these different genres that are actually like really atmospherically engaging, but also engaging in terms of sort of like social commentary, in terms of sort of like mystery and the things that can propel a story forward. And all of this kind of like blended together in a way that allowed me to explore characters and human nature, but through a story that's actually interesting. And subsequently it became much darker, it became much more personal, like a lot more personal than it originally started out to be, because originally it was like too visual, it was too expository, and the further I went along, I was like, I need to, like, all of that existed in my head, but I needed to pare it down in terms of what is essential to tell an interesting story. And the Mushroom Blues was actually not the first book to be born out of that. It was one called Spore City, which is going to be my second book and the start of a different series within the Fungalverse. So I worked on that one for like, I mean, I came up with the original ideas maybe 5.5 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And then I worked on Spore City for 3 years. And that is like a skeleton that I ditched and realized like I can make something out of this, but I want to write something else first. And that's where I started with Mushroom Blues. So yeah, we can get into the indie stuff too, but I'll let you two talk for a minute.
No,
well, while we're talking about the
amazing.
Fungalverse, which
Yeah.
awesome name, that I love that so much.
Thank you.
People who follow you online can see your illustrations and the tattoos that you have created, and you'll notice that you often incorporate nature and specifically mushrooms and fungi into your art. What was it that kind of sparked your interest with mushrooms in the first place?
Just forests. Like I grew up in British Columbia, which is, I mean, many people associate the word rainforest with tropical locations, with the equator, or with either of the tropics, but they don't necessarily associate that word with temperate. But British Columbia and Seattle, or sorry, Washington State, Oregon State, even like all the way up to Alaska, is just this like continuous combination of mountains and temperate rainforests and rivers and lakes and glaciers. And it's so lush, but in a way that people might not be familiar with. And one of the things about it is that like the temperate climate is ideal for mushrooms to grow because there's enough moisture for them to basically absorb through the mycelium that's beneath the ground. And there are so many trees and so much foliage for them to interact with. There's a term called mycorrhizal, which basically means like the interactions between mycelium and the roots of tree systems. And so that relationship is really potent because it allows these things to exist symbiotically. And the forest is just immense because of it. It's like the redwoods in San Francisco that a lot of people are familiar with is a result of this mycorrhizal relationship. And the forests in British Columbia are gigantic. Like there are trees that 12 people can hold hands and go around. And so where I grew up, on Vancouver Island, there were so many forests around. Even if I went out into my parents' backyard, I would see mushrooms there. And at that time, I didn't really realize what was going on beneath the ground, but the fruiting body itself was the kind of thing that I could interact with and be really curious about. It's like, what's this slimy thing? And like, I'm just gonna poke it and like break it and look at the gills and all this different kind of stuff. If I went out into the forest, it's like, oh wow, there are different varieties of mushrooms. Like, they're a completely different species, and they look so different. Like, some of them look like brains, and some of them look like, you know, what you associate with like the bulbous cap. And then some of them look like, you know, like the red cap, it's called Amanita muscaria, but it's like the bulbous red cap with like white spots on it that they use in like Mario and different different like series, and that visual reference is so potent for a lot of people, but they don't really understand like where it comes from. And so as I got older, this relationship with mushrooms just became so much deeper when I started exploring psychedelics, basically. Like, the ways in which psychedelics can deepen your connection with nature, but also the ways that they can enhance your perception of the world and allow you to look inward and sort of expand your consciousness in a lot of ways. So it's been like hand in hand with literature and art. Mushrooms have been a part of my life for ever, as far as I can remember.
It's so amazing to hear you talk about it, because like you could tell you've just been kind of captured with the thought of how like mushrooms work and exist in the world. And as someone
like
who
I learned about mycorrhizal relationships in biology class from my teacher a long time ago, I never would have like gotten this deep and this like it's very much like a spiritual thing almost, the way that you were connected to this. And I just love that it has such deep meaning for you.
Yeah, and for me, it's a very emotional thing, because mushrooms are, not only has it been the thing that helped me better connect with the people around me in terms of like friends that I have to this day who I met when I went to university in Vancouver, friends that I met in Berlin, which one of the people who made the soundtrack for Mushroom Blues is my best friend. We met in Berlin. We bonded over Studio Ghibli and mushrooms, basically. And now it's like 8 years later, we are able to collaborate on this thing, which is my book, but it's also a collaborative experiment where I can bring in artists or editors that I love, but also my friends who make music, and say like, hey, do you want to collaborate on this? And they started a record label out of this idea. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That was actually going to be my next question, because you did send us the soundtrack, and you have all these illustrations. You have this entire world that you seem to have worked with like yourself and other artists. And like, what's it been like building this really immersive experience with your books and with this world you've built, and like with the music and everything in between that you've been working on with other creators?
Can I tie this into the indie question that you brought up earlier?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Segue. Haha.
It's almost like you've done this before.
I know. I haven't done like 100 episodes of anything, whatever. Okay, so the indie thing, SFF Addicts single-handedly convinced me not to go trad. All of the authors that I've met, and at this point it's like we've published, by the time we're recording this, my 89 episodes, but on top of that, it's like I've done 3 TBR cons. I've hosted like author roundtables and stuff on the Fanfightic YouTube channel. So there's just so much interaction with people from different backgrounds writing different books in different genres. And even though I've seen people who have had success and have found satisfaction for their particular career goals and their trajectory as authors in the traditional space, I realize it's just not for me. Like, I am an impatient person. if I want to do something, I want to do it my way, but I want to do it as soon as I am capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so trad just doesn't run that way. It's like,
it seems like it's kind of a hurry up and wait.
yeah. And a lot of it is like waiting for the gears to turn just to receive an email, just to receive a confirmation about something, just to receive an idea of these are your sales numbers. And that's just like, you have this multitude of relationships between the author and their agent, and what the agent is capable of doing within the boundaries of their relationship with the editors and with the publisher. And everything works on such slow timescales where it's like, I've talked to Andrea Stewart, how long it took her to get published. And she's amazing and just an incredible writer. And it amazes me that it took her like a decade until her first book got picked up, Or my friend Nicholas Eames, he, like I met him when I was 19. We were just working at a restaurant together.
That's
and
amazing.
At that point, it was like he was that older guy who was like super nerdy, but I was also super nerdy. So I was like, we bonded over that. And he drank like scotch and whiskey. And I was just like 19 years old getting fucked up on like whatever the cheapest stuff that was available. But we were able to have these very meaningful conversations despite the fact that we have almost 10 years difference between us. But it was like kindred spirits kind of thing. And I've found that kindred spirit relationship with lots of other people in the SFF community, whether it's like podcasters or whether it's authors and what have you. But it's like I see all these different authors who are super talented, but the traditional space just didn't, it took a long time to accept their work and allow the broader public to understand the true specialness of their fiction and their capabilities as writers. And so for me, it's kind of like, I don't know, just with everything that I've done in my life up until this point, it's like I was a self-employed freelance music journalist in university. I was a self-employed tattoo artist in Berlin. Like, I worked at studios eventually, but I realized I liked working on my own, or I liked the idea of having a creative space that was more reflective of me. And so it's like my whole life has basically been DIY. And coming into the SFF community and meeting all the podcasters and meeting authors and realizing like, holy shit, indie authors are incredible entrepreneurs. They know how to hustle, they know how to market, but they also know how to delegate the tasks that they themselves are not capable of. And so for me, it was really inspiring to, on one hand, approach the sad reality that traditional publishing wasn't for me, because I don't want to wait X number of years to find an agent. I don't want to wait X number of years for that agent to pitch my book to an editor who's willing to pick it up, and then wait for the gears of publishing to turn, for the editing process and for cover art and all this different kind of stuff and marketing, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, cool. Do I want to publish a book in 2024? Do I want to potentially publish a book in like 2028 or 2030 at like the earliest? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
And so meeting all these indie authors was really inspiring, because they showed me that if you have the right skills and you know the right people, but at the very least, if you put in the time to research, that there are so many doors open to you in terms of where you can go and what you can accomplish, so long as you have a vision and so long as you find the right people to help you enact that vision, basically. So I was like, yeah, fuck trad. Like, I have a podcast, like I know a ton of people, and like my cover artist, Felix Ortiz, amazingly talented and such a great guy. And I had him on my podcast 2 years ago. So I was like, send him a DM on Facebook and was
And
like,
now a
hey
lot
man,
of authors are trying to get Felix to do their cover art.
it's been that way for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he's really, his process is incredible. I think in total took him about like 6 days to do my cover,
Oh my gosh.
but it
Wow.
was a very collaborative experience in the sense that I know how this goes, and I prepared basically like an art brief for him to say like, this is the exact color palette that I want. These are visual references for the world, but also visual references for the particular characters. These are certain elements that I would like to have in it. Here's, like the title and the synopsis and an excerpt from the beginning of the book and all this different stuff. It was like an 8-page PDF basically.
Wow.
But that was like, I knew that would be a starting point for him, that he could get going without having to consult me. And so he came to me one day and was like, here's my sort of, how did he frame it? Positional sort of sketch. It wasn't a sketch. It was like a very early painting, but it was like, what do you think about the position of different elements? What do you think about the angles of the buildings and all these different parts of it? And just gave him my feedback. Next day he comes to me with an update. I gave him my feedback. Next day update. Next same day feedback, and it was just that over the course of 5 days. And then boom, there's the finished art. And I was like, dude, you like, it was like this, like a tree in my ceiling. It was like a mycorrhizal mind
I was gonna
relationship.
say-
I was about to say it was,
Throughout
yeah, it sounded
all of
exactly
this-
like
Throughout all of this that you're
symbiotic
saying,
relationship.
we're
Yeah.
getting this network, this connectedness that
Yeah.
you have with
Yeah.
the people that you are drawing inspiration from, that you're helping, that they're helping you, and that you're kind of like sensing the right things to move forward with your own
Yep.
project. So I think that's really neat.
Yeah. And it was the same thing with the music. I mean, I love sort of multimedia experiences. I think it's really invigorating and just fascinating. Like some of the most surreal experiences I've had in my life were multimedia experiences. Like, can't remember, I think it was it's in Tokyo, Japan, but it's called Team Labs, and it's like this warehouse that they converted in the dockyards of Tokyo into this like gigantic multimedia experience where there are each room has different visual elements, and it's like they've programmed the lights and they've included different kinds of decorations and whatnot. Like one room that you walk into and it's like crystals hanging from the roof, and you can't, and it's the roof is mirror, so you can't really perceive your sense of space in there. And then they have this beautiful ambient ethereal music that's playing, and it's just awe-inspiring.
Amazing.
And the word that always comes to my mind is sublime, because being able to step outside of yourself, and this is something that mushrooms have taught me, being able to step outside of yourself and experience the sublime in the world, whether it's in nature or whether it's with people, or an experience like that where your senses are just being, bombarded, or not bombarded in like a bad way where it's like too much, but there's just like an invigorating sense of sensory input going on there. And I adore that, And so with a book, it's like, yeah, I thought like, fuck it, I'm going to do as much as I can with the people that I know and the people that I love. Like working with Felix was amazing. Working with my two friends in Sweden, who are the ones who composed and produced the Mushroom Blue soundtrack. And they made like 8 full, beautiful songs that are both like eerie and gorgeous and amazing all at the same time.
It's
Like,
the perfect vibe.
oh
Yeah.
my God.
I
Like they
keep thinking
absolutely
of the
captured
term
it.
visceral, like it's just visceral.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. And it's like I use their music in the promotional material that I've done. So it's like, for me, like I have a background in graphic design as well. So I was able to animate like promo videos. So it's like the teaser trailer or the cover reveal trailer, where I actually took Felix's art and animated it on my computer and set it to the soundtrack that my friends from Sweden made. And it's like, you know, super immersive.
Yeah.
And I've had people DM me and be like, feels like I'm watching like the intro to like an anime or something like that, you know? Or it's like that,
Yeah, kind of.
that feels like the thing that you could use to pitch a TV studio or a movie studio or an anime studio on making an adaptation of your book, you know? And it was like, I just have the skill set that I can do that myself. Whereas like not all authors have that, and that's totally fine. That's where delegation comes in, where it's like you have the ability to look at the professionals, and there are so many freelance professionals now in the indie space that you can seek them out and bring them into your collaborative process to make your book as good as possible, you know? And it's like, even though I was able to do a lot myself, like I did the typography and cover design and the interior design for the book as well. Just because I know how to do that stuff.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how to do that stuff, find the right artist, like find the right cover designer, find the right editor, find the right people to be able to help you achieve the most awesome version of your thing as possible. And in my case, it's like I just knew a lot of people, like my two friends in Sweden. So my best friend, I messaged him and I was like, you know, he and I've collaborated in the past. We've done like sort of like pop-up parties and stuff where I would do live tattooing and he would DJ. And so we do stuff like that in Berlin. We did stuff like that in Vancouver as well. And so it's like, I know how capable he is as both a DJ and as a music producer. So I trusted him and I was like, I want you to be involved in like making a soundtrack. And he's like, I'll get back to you. In a good way, where he was like, I'm in, but I'll get back to you. And he came back.
You believe him that he'll get back to you.
Yeah. No, he got back to me the next day and he said, I have someone I want to collaborate on this with. He's a friend of mine from sound engineering school. And he sent me a screenshot of his friend's notebook, the notebook that he has all of his ideas in. And in that notebook, one of the notes from like a year and a half ago said Mycelium concept album. And I was like, it's serendipity, man. Like, serendipity. And so it's been amazing to work with them. It's been amazing to see what their jam sessions have produced. And just like the quality of it is stunning. And so they're going to release it digitally. And then they're also doing a limited 50 print run of cassette tapes. So it's like custom cassette tapes, which is cool because in Mushroom Blues, cassette tapes and music actually have a role to play in the story itself. So it's kind of this like cool meta thing at the same time.
I love it.
Yeah.
So in Mushroom Blues, it's really creative and there's a lot of like scientific and Japanese elements to the story and the characters. What was like your research process and your world building process for making Mushroom Blues?
A lot of it took place in that like world building deluge that I mentioned earlier, where I was drawing a lot and just like researching a lot. Like I have books like this just like on my desk. This is
cool.
The Complete Mushroom Hunter by Gary Linkoff. Gary Linkoff is actually a fantastic mycologist. Also read a lot of books by people like Paul Stamets. And he has a particular book called Mycelium Running, which is actually very fascinating. And that book is sort of a proposal. This is like a much, much better conception of what my preachy travelogue kind of thing was. It's nonfiction. It's all about mushrooms and mycelium, but it is basically a way to conceptualize the betterment of our world through the use and application and lens of mushrooms. So it's like in my world, I have terms like mycocrete, which is like mycological concrete, or I have mycelium actually forming the basis for different structures. So it's like the very architecture of this world, at least for the fungal people, a lot of it is incorporates or is built upon the foundation of mycelium and mushrooms. And so his ideas of microremediation, which is essentially the idea of using mycelium and mushrooms to clean up environments. A specific example would be in Ecuador, where I live, where Chevron, the oil company, back in the 70s and 80s, I believe, opened up oil wells in the Amazon rainforest and caused an immense amount of devastation, but also a lot of displacement of indigenous tribes. And what they found, going back and researching this area and investigating it years later, is that certain species of mushrooms actually inhabited that space, which was previously considered just unlivable and contaminated and unbelievably toxic. But the mushrooms inhabited this space and were actually biologically prepared to consume and reuse the petroleum. And so it's like oil spills. There are ideas for using sort of like mushroom-based biomimicry to clean up oil spills using fungi as like a base concept. There are ways in which concrete, which is a horrible process to actually produce concrete, it's very environmentally unfriendly, but you can actually use mycelium to create bricks that you can then use in construction. So there are different ways in which mycelium and mushrooms can be used to incorporate into our real world, whether it's like making a building or an earthquake-proof building at that, or at the same time, like building a chair or a hat. Like you can have like mycelium infused into fabric. And so it's like I incorporated a lot of that into the world in terms of how mycelium could be used as it can be used as like a mechanism through which people can kind of very subtly generate these ideas or questions in their head, where it's not like in your face, like mycelium is the answer to everything or anything like that. But if you read it and you're like a clothing made out of mycelium, or like a building made out of mycelium, or like how mushrooms are incorporated, like what the fuck is going on here? And hopefully that is the basis for people to investigate a little further and find people like Paul Stamets. And on the other hand, there are more spiritual approaches to mycology, which I then incorporated into my love and fascination with Japan, which also includes a lot of, fittingly enough, animistic religious practices, specifically Shintoism. And so is like blending Shintoism and cultural and spiritual practices of Japan with the religious and spiritual practices of different indigenous groups around the world and their relationship with mushrooms as sort of the, how would I put this, the gateway to the spirit realm. And so it's like you look at indigenous cultures in where is it, Mexico, indigenous cultures in Siberia, indigenous cultures in the Amazon rainforest and different parts of South America. A lot of them, even like Christianity, a lot of the foundations of Christianity are proposed to be based on the consumption of psychedelics. Or in Greek history, the cult of Dionysus. There are ideas that the cult of Dionysus was essentially like a psychedelic fertility cult where the participants would consume, it was like a wine cocktail, but it was mixed with hallucinogens. And that would essentially allow them to undergo an experience that would connect them with the spiritual realm and connect them with their gods. And so it's like the power of mushrooms to be a spiritual gateway is just unbelievably powerful. And so I incorporated Japanese Shintoism and psychedelic relationships for indigenous cultures, but also throughout Middle Eastern and the Western canon as well. Like psychedelics have been around for a really long time, and they're very enlightening in a way that this was like humanity's first enlightenment before the enlightenment that we're used to in the West. And so it was really cool to be able to bring that and create this religion called Ionism, which is essentially called the path of the gods in the Japanese fungal language. And I created like a pantheon of deities and different sort of sub deities and stuff like that. And the symbol of this gigantic, like 1 mile high mushroom that is in the skyline of Neokonoko, where Mushroom Blues is set, is essentially the embodiment of Mother Chikyu, which is the mother mushroom and the principal goddess in their religion. So it's really fascinating for me to be able to bring all of these different elements together and pull on the research of different academics. Like there's a fascinating book called Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna, which explores psychedelic history through is a sort of like an anthropological and biological lens mixed together. And then there's the Sacred Cross and the Mushroom by John M. Allegro, which explores the psychedelic history hidden within the Bible. And so it's like fascinating the ways in which these very different religions and cultures around the world, you know, centuries and millennia ago, a lot of them were building their foundations, spiritual foundations, on psychedelics and the ways in which that enabled them to connect with the spiritual realm.
That is,
I love that.
I feel like I can talk to you about the history of mushrooms.
I was going to say,
for
I
so long.
probably could listen to this forever.
I could probably, you could probably just tell us like every single book you've ever read about mushrooms and what you found in them, and we'll both just sit here and be like, "Oh, really? Tell us more."
When you started getting into like the religious aspects of it, and you're bringing in mythology and all, I'm like, I'm fascinated in this. Like, this is exactly my jam.
Unbelievable, yeah. Actually, another one quick recommendation: The Immortality Key by Brian Moresco, which is the one it explores through direct archaeological evidence in terms of like chemical samples from chalices and pottery and stuff like that, to basically reason the use of psychedelics within religious and cultural practices like the cult of Dionysus.
That's fascinating. Okay.
Awesome.
And I feel like this gets to what you had said earlier, like the world building of this was just so much that sometimes you're sitting there and you were like, well, I actually have to write a plot now. So
yeah, exactly.
I am going to make you talk a little bit about the overall plot of Mushroom Blues, your first book set in this like very expansive universe.
Okay, so Mushroom Blues is the story of Henrietta Hoffman, who is a homicide detective. Yeah, we go from like mushrooms and spiritualism, and we're going murder mystery police procedural now.
Everyone was seeing it. Everyone saw it coming. No one was shocked by that.
No. If you've seen the cover, it's like I pitch it as Blade Runner, True Detective, and District 9 meld with the weird worlds of Jeff Vandermeer, Philip K. Dick, and China Mieville.
You like listed all the things I'm upset.
It's
I'm
like
a very
all of Hannah's favorite things.
True Detective, Jeff Vandermeer, like I'm here for it. So.
We got this. So it's the story of Henrietta Hoffman, who is a homicide detective in Neokonoko, which is the capital city of Hopon, which is basically like a war-torn colonized nation. 2 years prior, the nation of Caprinia, where Henrietta comes from, invaded Hopon for reasons that will not be explained in this book, but are part of much of the future Fungalverse books. And so it's like I was very much inspired by post-war Japan after World War II, and how the United States basically had a military occupation of Japan, and Tokyo especially was kind of this special administrative zone where General Douglas MacArthur and his military government was able to lead Japan into its post-war reinvigoration. But there was just a lot of famine, there was a lot of displacement, there was a lot of mismanagement of resources. And at the same time, it's like Tokyo itself was just in ruins. And so I explore a lot of that here, where parts of Neo-Kanoko are literally irradiated and they're just destroyed, and people are living in slums, and there's a lot of sort of fraught relationships based on the fact that people are starving. Mushroom people are essentially forced to eat mushrooms that they themselves grow in their little ad hoc gardens in order to survive. And so a lot of stuff like this and these dynamics playing into a murder mystery where Henrietta finds the dead body of a child washed up on a beach, and this setting her off on an investigation where she uncovers the reason why this child was murdered, but also why other children are either murdered or missing, and how that plays into the relationships between humans and fungals. And she's also joined by a mushroom-headed beat cop named Koji Nameko, who's my boy. I love him. And this book is kind of framed as like a police procedural murder mystery, but deep down it's a story about awakening and acceptance. And these are things that mushrooms have brought to my life in terms of awakening from, I guess, like the strictures of my upbringing and the expectations of society, but also an acceptance of me and myself and my weirdness and the things that allow me to express myself without the limitations and judgment of other people affecting me and preventing me from doing those things. And so for Henrietta, this journey that she goes on in this investigation and her difficult relationship with Koji and the fungals as a whole leads her towards this climax of accepting herself and the things that she's done and the things that she's gone through, but also awakening to the realities of the world around her and what role she wants to play in that world.
Well, you were like inside my brain, because my next question was like, what was it like to
podcaster segue
kind of
energy.
right? Well, I was wondering, like, what was it like to kind of write and explore a character in this process of learning and unlearning?
It was difficult. It was fucking difficult. Like, because, you know, like you two know, like the beginning of the book, Henrietta she's not a good person.
I mean, she's saying slurs. She's incredibly rude. She has no understanding of these people.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like this person who is discriminatory, this person who is programmed culturally and socially to feel disdain toward another group. And it was really hard to put myself in that place. I was actually inspired a lot by there's a man from the United States. I think his name is Daryl. Let me find out real quick. Yeah. Okay. So Daryl Davis, who's a African-American musician who single-handedly converted hundreds of members of the KKK away from that group. And so it's like hearing his story and understanding that even though he's on the end of the sort of spectrum,
All of the
where
hate.
he's receiving all the hate,
receiving all the hate. Yeah,
exactly. But he found the compassion to speak to people who despised him. He had the patience to converse with them and essentially allow them the opportunity to understand their wrongdoing and understand the misplaced nature of their hatred and their racism. And so it's kind of like having to put myself into the position of the people that he converted away from the KKK and figuring like, this is a world where a country was led to war, and there's just this especially in like World War II and sort of like the great wars of the 20th century, there's this feeling of nationalism and patriotism that goes along with the ways in which nations would fight one another, the ways in which nations would often invade one another. And it really boggles my mind to think like, how would someone within that, like how would someone within Nazi Germany in the 1930s, as Hitler and his party are coming to power and then being led into war, and the propaganda that's involved and the cultural programming that's involved and the dissemination of information based on what the ruling class wants you to think and believe in your heart. And a lot of the people in Germany at that time thought it was the right thing for the Nazi party to be doing what they were doing, not because they're bad people, but because their world and their culture and everything around them was warping their minds in order to believe a truth that was the truth dictated by a party, not the truth lived through experience or through relationships with the people that your hatred is being pushed upon. And so it's like, I remember talking to Fonda Lee about morally gray characters. We did this amazing masterclass on morally gray characters. But one of the most poignant things that she brought up was, none of my characters are morally gray. It is their world and their circumstances and their cultural upbringing that is morally gray, because that is what shaped them. And that was
Absolutely.
a huge, huge inspiration for me, where I was like, my mind was just blown.
Yeah.
Because you hear the term morally gray thrown around all the time.
Yeah.
But morally gray world and morally gray circumstances and morally gray cultural practices, like these things don't get discussed as often because it doesn't sound as sexy as morally gray.
And I think
but,
it allows the reader to hold themselves above the morally gray character, quote unquote, where it's like they don't want to admit that, like, if they were thrown into similar circumstances, they may make the same choices.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I can see that they're wrong. And it's like, yes, because that's your job as the reader.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also see like a situation where it's like allowing readers to almost like kind of excuse the system in a way where we can blame a character and be like, oh no, they're just a really shitty person, but the system's totally fine.
Exactly.
And so yeah, Fonda nailed it.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance that humans are very susceptible to the influence of broader systems.
Right.
Basically, like you look at the United States as an example, and it's a very, very obvious example, because there are the political divisions, which are divisions that arise through the political programming of two different parties, and how those two different parties essentially dictate a certain truth to their constituents, and then how those constituents then incorporate those truths into their sense of identity. And so for Henrietta, in the world that she's living in, she's a cop. She was a cop in Caprinia before she was exiled to Neokanoko, which is shitty for her because she's mycophobic. And her story in terms of how she came to Neokanoko is somewhat addressed in Mushroom Blues, but it also plays into the later books that come in the Hoffman Report series. Specifically her shitty ex-husband, which I'm very, very excited about.
Mentioned right away.
He gets blamed so much. I'm like,
fuck
here
you,
for
Frederick.
it. He does sound terrible. So,
but it was interesting for me to be able to explore how Henrietta reflects her programming in terms of her her surroundings in the Neokonoko Police Department, but also the propaganda that was sort of belayed onto the Caprinian population during the war and after the war and all this different kind of stuff, and how the book and her relationship with Koji and her relationship with sort of a lot of different fungal people that she meets along the way are converting her in this very abrupt and jarring way, which is kind of like world shaking for her. And the book only takes place over the course of like a few days. There's an epilogue that takes place a few days later, but I wanted it to be that tight of a time frame because for me, my experiences with mushrooms and with psychedelics, the effect that it has had on my life has been that quick and has been that jarring. And so I wanted to reflect the potency of that kind of experience within a tighter time frame in the story.
Well, this entire like writing book experience is like so atmospheric, and then the way that you see that it's like tied into your own life is just fascinating.
Well, and like
thank you.
We only got a snapshot of this, but in the couple chapters we did read, like it was amazing to read how effective you are of like showing Henrietta's character and like the way propaganda has affected her, because there's like a whole bunch of like fear mongering and othering of the fungal people and like a fear of being infected. And like it's dripping at every
pandemic
page.
shit just like trickling.
She watched The Last of Us.
No, I'm a huge fan of The Last of Us, both the video game series and the TV show.
And that's like even compared with the small snapshot we get of the fungal people, who are more about like community in a sense of like understanding one another, and it's all kind of networked together in a way that she doesn't seem to understand and she like fights against, where like there were so many parts in the small portion I read where I was like, how does she not know this about them? And then I'm like, well, propaganda, that's people just don't know very specific basic facts about other groups of people.
She's also only been there for a few months, so it's kind of like struggling with like the language barrier, struggling with the cultural and social barrier, but also like the fungal people in terms of their, like in terms of my framing in my head, I kind of viewed it as like, what would it be like for Homo sapiens to interact with Neanderthals?
Yeah.
You know, it's like these are different branches, different subspecies of essentially like a shared loci in terms of like our history. It's like, what would happen if humans branched off this way and some humans branched off this way and they became isolated on an archipelago that just so happened to be like mycologically rich, and over the course of tens of thousands of years they become symbiotically linked to those mushrooms in their very being and their very biology. And so how would that shape their forms of communication? How would that shape the ways in which they build things, their architecture, or the way they organize their societies? And that led to like my creation of what is essentially like mind-to-mind communication. But I liken it to social media, where it's like there's direct communication to another person and like a direct link to their brain and their words, but there's also the ability to obfuscate and the ability to kind of like blur your emotions. And so it's much more based in sense, it's much more based in emotion, but there are different sort of visual elements that reflect on the ways in which fungals interact with one another. Like their spores release in certain ways. They're black when they're angry, or it's like they're white.
It's very much connected to their emotions and stuff too. It's like a combination of emotion and biology is what you're picking up on when you're reading it.
Yeah, and they can also kind of like sense each other. It's like their gills twitch and they're kind of like reaching out for somebody. and different things like that.
Like
Yeah.
sometimes they're blocked off when they really don't want. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. Like you have a lot of expansive ideas. So what made you kind of pinpoint that you wanted to do like police procedural as like the first book of the fungal universe?
I just adore police procedurals. Yeah. It's like we mentioned Blade Runner, we mentioned True Detective. Both police procedurals in certain ways. I would say True Detective is more traditional in that sense, whereas obviously Blade Runner is emblematic of cyberpunk, but it's much more focused on the character as opposed to the case. But for me, the best police procedurals like True Detective, especially season 1, which is like, to me, it's
Out of
like
this world.
it's like gothic horror. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Season 3 as well is very good. It feels like very like Midwestern, just very atmospheric, but also a really beautiful character study.
Yeah.
And I think the best police procedurals are the ones that are deep character studies, but also deep societal investigations through the investigation itself.
Yeah.
And the character and the way that they perceive the world. You're able to understand their sort of like moral frameworks, but also the ways in which the world itself allowed for this murder or this crime to happen. Like Seven, the David Fincher movie.
Oh yeah.
Amazing movie,
good.
but like so just visceral and raw. And that's another thing I love about murder mysteries, but also police procedurals, is like there's a technicality to it.
Yeah.
And there's sort of like a framework that you can build off of, but at the same time, it allows so much room for an exploration of individual people, but also exploration of different environments in terms of like the ambiance that you can evoke through language or through the visual medium. And then at the same time, being able to hit on all those notes of what the society is like that allows for this to take place. And so it's like you have so many different sort of interacting systems that make for a really great story. What do people love about stories? Fascinating worlds, fascinating characters, doing fascinating things. And so if you can bring all those three things together and make the world really rich and atmospheric, but also make the characters very, not necessarily relatable, but captivating and real enough that you're engaged to follow through with the story. And then the story itself with the murder and the investigation and, you know, going to like the crime scenes and like seeing the forensic technicians and going to the police station and, you know, having like the fun tropes that
paperwork and
the paperwork and all this different the stuff that you can like
bad
really
coffee.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the stuff that you can kind of lean into. There are a lot of like really fun tropes in police procedurals and murder mysteries that I don't think have been worn out like other genres have. And so it's just like the perfect framework for me to lean into these things that I love, but also capture those different elements that make a story really good. And then with other series, it's like the Hoffman Report will be more, you know, police procedural, whereas my next book in that series will be like, you know, like biotech, cyberpunk, and all that different kind of stuff that I can explore in different eras of this world.
Well, that's kind of leads into my question. Actually, is that I didn't know if this was going to be
podcast energy.
Did you write these questions? Did you give them to us?
You didn't send me shit before, so it's like really fun. Yeah.
But I was kind of wondering, like, I don't know, maybe it's spoilery, but with the way that there's this network for the fungal people and the way that they are like connected and can sense one another, is there going to be some kind of connection between all of the extended Fungalverse and your different series within it? Like kind of a Brandon Sanderson, like big overarching theme here, and like everything is connected to one another, connected to this one, connected to that one.
Yeah, it's not as I guess like explaining. Actually, I was explaining it to a podcaster friend. We're gonna chat next week, and he was asking me like how many books are in this like series, and then I just kind of got into it, and there's this series which is, so the Hoffman Report is going to be 4 books. I've got them all sort of mapped out in terms of what happens and like rough trajectory. And then the book that I'm going to put out later this year, fingers crossed everything goes together with that. That's going to be Spore City, which is the start of the Kanoko trilogy. And so that's going to be 3 books. And those are kind of like my love letter to cyberpunk, but also my love letter to Fondalise, the Greenbone saga.
Yay!
Because it's like incorporating sort of like fungal gang families with corporate espionage, and also including a character that appears in Mushroom Blues as a POV character in that book, investigating another series of murders. So it's kind of like genre blending all these things together. That's going to be 3 books. Book 1 is more like this genre blender. Book 2 is going to be expanding on that and expanding the scope. And that's more of like political thriller centered around an election. And then the 3rd book is going to be more of like a globe spanning war thriller kind of thing, where it's like clashing countries and things get like, the scope just gets bigger and bigger. And there are
I'm
characters
so
in
impressed that you have this all
You're
planned
like
out.
speaking to all of our favorite things too. I feel it's
Yeah,
like
like,
my thing. I'm a police procedural girly, Greenbone saga person. Like, love it all. So
the reaction that you had though to like, you know what, I love the Greenbone saga so much. I'm going to write this book like as like an honor to her. Whereas I'm like crying on my couch. Damn you, Fonda, to answer for your crimes.
I actually wrote to Fonda after. I was like you just like broke my heart. But I love this book, and I love the series. Yeah,
series
in the best possible way. And
Yes.
I love how she went from, she basically just like expanded with each book in terms of the time scales and the scope and geography. So it's like that was big for me. It was like book 1 is like the Spore City, and we like get more time in Neo Kanoko. But then book 2, it's like you see more of Hapan and you see Caprinia, and then book 3, it's like you're going to different countries and how these different governments are essentially like funding shadow wars and trying to like outmaneuver each other and things like that. And then on top of that, there's the Spore War, which is mentioned in Mushroom Blues. I have a standalone planned for that one, which is actually like, that one will be much farther down the line, but I need to like dive into the Spore War and kind of explore that a little bit. But I kind of wanted to explore it from like a romantic sort of angle, where it's like 2 star-crossed lovers on opposite sides of this war kind of thing.
Awesome.
Even though one's fungal and one's human, and it's like how does that all come together? And then I have 2 short story collections that I've more or less want to do, but don't really have any specific ideas of how I want them to play out. And then I have a duology, which is set 250 years before, which is basically like Akira Kurosawa on mushrooms with like fungal samurai and stuff like that.
Oh, I love that.
So yeah.
I don't know how you have all this time to do this as a stay-at-home dad. Like, that's so
Yeah,
impressive.
like
I just sitting here like,
let's rewind
like,
listeners to the beginning of the episode when Adrian listed all these different things and was like, yeah, but then I have time to do this and this and I'm like, okay, so
really
we've learned that Adrian doesn't sleep.
I do sleep.
What's happening here?
Yeah.
Somehow. He's just writing while he sleeps. That's what's
well, another
going
thing
on.
you did was
no, actually, I didn't tell you that the Fungalverse started with a dream.
Oh,
my gosh.
amazing.
I had a dream. So this is about like 6 years ago, and then I wrote it down in a notebook. But it was basically like, this is why it was more like fantasy oriented at the beginning. But my dream was literally just like me walking through a forest and seeing this like gigantic mushroom, like bioluminescent, like spores flowing out of it, like towering above the trees. And that was like, the mother mushroom was the first thing that came to me, and then everything else just kind of like float out of there and colonize my mind.
Amazing.
So
That is so cool. And my
so
dreams
cool.
really need to step it up because they're so boring.
I have written down a short. One of my first published short story was a dream. So
One of like my only dreams I can remember was like for some reason our dentist like broke into our house and stole things. Like, why would our dentist break in? Like, he doesn't
Right.
care. Like,
He doesn't
why am I
care.
dreaming this?
Aw.
oh man.
But Adrian, another thing that you did when you were doing all these other things in your free time, you are narrating the audio version of Mushroom Blues.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
was kind of curious what it's like to voice some of these different characters, especially Baird.
Yeah, Barrett is actually, he's Scottish, and I
Yes.
got to practice with that one for so it's like on the SFF Addicts Patreon, we have author readings.
Mhm.
MJ has like a free novelette when you sign up for her newsletter, which is called The Sham Wizard of Golden Dawn. Just go to her website, check it out. It's a free novelette. Like, you'll have fun with it. On our Patreon, I narrated like the first section of it, but in a Scottish accent, because I was just like, fuck it, I want to have fun and see how it goes. And then a friend of mine, Andrew Watson, who's a YouTuber and an author, and I showed it to him, and he just gave me he just sent me a GIF that was like Faramir and Boromir hugging, and it just says brother underneath. So I was like,
that's so nice.
That's
yeah,
great.
so it was so nice. So yeah, just like it's fun because I've done tests and everything like that to kind of get comfortable with it. And podcasting is the best practice I ever could have asked for in terms of being comfortable with my voice, which I used to hate. I used to hate listening to the sound of my own voice.
Can relate.
And podcasting basically forced me to disengage with whatever that mental block was. And
especially when you're
so,
like listening back when you're editing
Yeah.
and stuff. You're like,
the editing
the
process
first
was
few
the
times you're
worst.
like, oh, I hate that I
Laura.
sound
Yeah.
like this.
So glad I don't have
but
to edit.
at the same time, it does teach you how to articulate your ideas and articulate things in a much more concise and clear way.
Yeah.
And also it attunes you to the speech patterns of different people, where I listen to like, I don't know how many hundreds of different voices I've listened to at this point, but it's really exciting to listen and edit specifically for the reason of like, how do you speak? Like the first time I heard Adrian Tchaikovsky speak when we chatted, I was like, you just like, I just love the way you talk. Like, it's just
Beard
so,
Adrian.
Yeah, bearded Adrian, not shaved Adrian. Thanks for that deep cut.
Yeah. I'm a true
So-
He
fan.
said she's a fan.
She's a true fan. But it's exciting. Like, I've talked to Travis Baldry about how he got into audio narration, and he started out just reading stories to his kids. And for me, it's like I've had more fun reading stories to my sons with the intention of just experimenting and playing around with different voices and seeing what works and what doesn't. And sometimes my son will say like, why are you speaking in that voice? You know, and I just be like, deal with it. I want to try this out, you know?
Kids are the harshest critics.
Yeah. So it's really funny because sometimes he'll say like, no, that voice is wrong. And I'm just like, what do you
No,
It's
judge
right
me?
because I said so.
Yeah.
that's how I imagined it, so it's right.
You
Yeah.
read the book then. So
Exactly. So it's so cool to just be able to for me, like, I don't listen to that many audiobooks, but I appreciate the act of speaking, and podcasting has made me appreciate how narrating a story can bring a whole new dimension to it for people who might not necessarily have the time or are not invested in the format of sitting down and reading an ebook reader or reading a physical book. And so I just love the idea of like, I've just done DIY for like this whole thing, so why not try this out too? And I'm really lucky because one of my best friends here in Quito, he's a sound engineer. That's his full-time job, but he's also a professor of music and sound engineering at a university here. So basically, like, we had lots of conversations about what would be involved in recording an audiobook, I got the setup right here. Basically, like I itemized everything like that I might potentially need, and he was like, "You're good." And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to record, and then he's going to do the mixing and mastering for me, and I'm going to incorporate the Mushroom Blue soundtrack into the audiobook as well. So
that was going to be my next question, is if that was making its way in.
That's awesome.
Do you want me to do Baird? I can do Baird right now for you if you want.
That would be awesome. Yes.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Let me just pull it up.
Put you totally on the spot.
No, I put myself on the spot. Quit it. Okay. Let me just find Baird's chapter. He's a piece of shit, by the way, for anyone who wants to know. Okay. You ready? I'm just gonna this is the opening of chapter 3.
Perfect.
Containment. Stand your ground. Commander Baird bellowed into a megaphone from beneath a black disposable face mask. His distinct accent and rolling R's were evident of his northern Caprinian upbringing. Do not engage. So there you have it.
That's amazing.
Okay, I'm impressed.
I'm so impressed. That was so good.
Every time I try to do a British accent, it immediately slips into Australian, and then somehow Southern accent. So I don't know how to do accents at all.
I used to actually, like, so many things come full circle. When I was in elementary school and I was obsessed with The Simpsons, I had a dream of being a voice actor. Specifically for The Simpsons. Yeah.
Gosh.
So it's like all these disparate things coming together in this like one project.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. Well, I feel like we have to almost end it there. Like we got a little bit of a snippet of the book.
Yeah.
We got a teaser, guys. Everyone should be going out and getting this book because it's going to be up very, very soon. So make sure you're pre-ordering.
So where's the best place to pick it up? Is it from your website? Can we get the book through your website?
So I'm not going to be doing pre-orders. I actually talked to multiple friends where I was like, I don't want to deal with that on top of everything that's already going on.
Mm-hmm.
And also for indie authors, I feel like pre-orders, it serves a much different purpose than it does for traditional publishers.
Fair.
But my friend Andy Peliquin actually said it might be a good idea to he kind of pitched me on the idea of like just doing continuous sort of like build up and momentum towards a specific release date, which works because I put together what like other indie authors have DM'd me and said like a jealousy inducing book tour. Of which this is the first. Yeah, this is like my first podcast. So I appreciate you two having me on. This is like the first podcast on the book tour.
Happy to have you on.
Yeah,
so much pressure.
No, it's like I tell you now, so there's no pressure.
Oh yeah,
right we already recorded it. Bumble through the last.
Yeah, I'm just gonna bumble and stumble through the end of it. So it's March 19th. Paperback, ebook, a hardcover, and audiobook. And that's also when the soundtrack is going to release. That'll be available. I'm not sure about the specific platforms yet, but we're going to do a digital release. There's going to be a limited 50 number run of cassette tapes, and it'll be on Spotify, where I'll also have like a Spotify playlist of like the stuff that I listened to while writing the book. And then I'll also have merch made already, which will be available on my website, adrianmgibson.com. So I think this comes out on like February 20th. So February 26th, I'm going to be doing like a merch drop and making all that available. So if you want some like fungal buttons and a fanny pack and t-shirts and stuff like that, you can go check that out.
I haven't mentioned it, but I have been going through a mushroom phase at my house. Like I keep buying mushroom things for our house to decorate
Crystal
our house.
too. She had a mushroom calendar where she took out all of the art pages and had them all framed and put in her office. It was beautiful.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I have like these wooden mushrooms that are like in my front entryway that are just like,
nice.
These are amazing. They look so cool.
Yeah.
And I also have like a white mushroom mug that I drink tea out of all the time. And I've just been on a very specific mushroom phase, to the point where I had to tell my future mother-in-law, like, don't buy me, like, I'm going to buy the mushroom stuff I want. I don't want it to overpower.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we actually have like these cool sort of like gnome mushroom combos of like these like sort of like statuettes that we put up at Christmas time. So it'd just be like these like goofy looking gnomes with like their hats up to down to their noses, and then these like beautiful Amanita muscaria mushrooms that go next to each of them.
Love that.
That's
so
awesome.
much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all of that. And as a final question for you, what is something you're reading, watching, and or enjoying right now?
I recently finished, speaking of Travis Baldree, I recently finished Bookshops and Bone Dust.
Love it.
Adorable.
Which is great. It didn't hit the same notes as Legends and Lattes, which kind of threw me off a bit. But in its own right, it's a very, very good novel. And Travis is an amazing person and a fantastic writer and an amazing audiobook narrator. And then at the same time, I'm reading, I mentioned Adrian Tchaikovsky as well. I'm reading Lords of Uncreation, which is book 3 in his final architecture series. Very hard, not like hard sci-fi, but like hard space opera, where there's just like big stakes, lots of characters, huge scale, and some like weird, fucked up, like planet-sized beings called the Architects, which reshape planets into murderous crystalline art, which is really fascinating.
That's fantastic.
I love that.
Adrian Tchaikovsky, like I'm so jealous of that talent and how he comes up with some of these things. Like I'm in awe.
Yeah, he's like one of my favorite people to talk to. Just like picking his brain about stuff. It's like, if it feels like my life is eclectic, he is very eclectic as well, and just brings so many of his different interests, but incorporates them in such a way where his storytelling is just like immensely weird, but so captivating and fun.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Adrian, where can everyone find you?
So you can find me on most platforms. I'm not on TikTok, but you can find me on like Twitter, X, whatever the fuck, Instagram,
whatever they're calling it these days.
Threads, at Adrian M Gibson. I'm on Facebook, but I don't really update it that much. My website, adrianmgibson.com. And then SFF Addicts, where you can hear me and MJ, the Chewy to my Han Solo, just like chat with authors every week. So every Tuesday, you can find it on all the podcast platforms, video on Spotify, video on YouTube at FanFi Addict. So
Laura's a fan, and so is her husband. So he is somewhere.
We are. I was in the top 1% of listeners last year. Brag.
Thank you. That means
my Spotify Wrapped.
Yeah.
But we want to thank you so much. Everyone, make sure.
Thank you. This has been such a delight.
Yeah, that you're listening to SFF Addicts, that you're doing all of those things. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast as your first podcast during this monumental tour that you're doing. That is
debut season.
I know.
And go pick up Mushroom Blues.
Please. Thank you so much again.
I really appreciate it. Just like fantastic to talk to you both, and very cool to also like listen to your podcast, and then I'll be able to chat with you.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you so much. I didn't mean to cut you off while you were giving us praise, but we thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for listening. Bye.
Bye.